Welcome to this continuing series of sessions and lectures on macroeconomics. I'm Tony Le, and in this fourth session, we're going to look at one of the major macroeconomic markets, that is the financial markets. And as you recall from our previous work in the circular flow model, there are three major markets: the product market, which is the top loop, the financial or money markets, which are at the center of the circular flow, and then the factor or resource markets, including labor markets, the circular flow. So here we'd like to spend a little time looking at financial institutions, banks, stock markets, and insurance companies. And I have some of the symbols from our circular flow model here just to discuss the role of financial institutions. So as households, we save and borrow money. So we have income, we set some aside, and we use it for various kinds of purposes. We can buy insurance or stocks and bonds, but we could also borrow money for our homes or big ticket items like cars. Companies raise capital in the financial markets. They borrow from banks, which is a debt because you owe it back to the bank, or they can sell IOUs. So they can go into the markets and sell an IOU, and that's called a bond, or that's a debt instrument. Or they could sell shares in their companies, and that would be an equity issuance. And of course, in the financial markets, people can trade stocks and bonds. So companies from all over the world can enter into our financial markets, as well as can governments enter into our financial markets. Now, the U.S. government borrows a substantial amount of money each year. And the primary way that they borrow the money is to sell what we think of as treasury securities, or, for example, savings bonds. You purchase a savings bond, say for $25, and at some period in the future you get $50 for it. It's an IOU. So the government says, I owe you 50, pay me 25 now. And we'll talk more about these IOUs or bonds a little bit later in our lecture series. Capital moves in and out of the U.S. From all over the world. So we're moving capital out. Capital's coming in. So the stock markets are active all over the world, and this is worldwide movement of these financial assets. So companies can borrow money here, which is debt, or raise capital in our markets, or trade, and governments do the same thing, borrow and lend. So financial institutions in the center here of the circular flow are intermediaries. People are using this to put in their savings and to borrow money. So it is an intermediary between savers and borrowers. So in order to understand the banking system or financial markets, we have to understand balance sheets. So the first thing we're going to do is look at a balance sheet for a hypothetical business here. So roasting peanuts. So if you just think about starting a small business, I'm sure you can envision the fact that before you get started, you need money. So what we're going to do is describe the beginnings of a company. So we raise money of some sort, and we use it to buy stuff, to acquire what we need to operate, whether it's a building, an inventory, etc. And we'd like to put this into a T account or a balance sheet. So liabilities here on the right-hand side capture the money that you've raised, or what you owe to people. If you put it in yourself, you owe it to yourself. What other people put it in, you owe it to them. So on the right-hand side is all the money, or what you owe to people. It's the people side. On the left-hand side, we have assets. So you take the money that you've amassed and you use it to get started. You buy stuff. So whether it's a building or equipment, the stuff is what you own. So here we have the basic balance sheet. Liabilities are what you owe, it's all the people. Assets are what you own, and that's all your stuff. Okay, so let's look at this again, just to add some definition to it. If you are an owner and you put money into the firm, it's called equity. If you borrow the money, say from a bank or from others, that's called debt. You owe it back to them. They also owe you your equity investment, but you're the last in line. You have to pay your debt holders first. They have the first call on any of your assets. Assets would be your, and this is all called capital, debt and equity. Your assets is the stuff you need to operate, cash, peanuts, a roasting cart, etc. Well, let's put a hypothetical case here. So you have a peanut roasting and vending business. And let's take a beginning snapshot, or what we would call a beginning balance sheet. So you go out and you borrow $1,000, say it's to the bank or from another individual, but it's an IOU. You need to pay it back to them. It's a debt that you owe. And you put in $2,000 of your own funds that you had from your savings, and that would be equity. So you have a total of $3,000 in liabilities plus equity, or $3,000 in capital. Now capital, remember, is all your money, and you owe this to people. But you use this capital to buy stuff. So let's buy some stuff. We have $3,000, could be in your checking account that you created for this company. So you spend $1,500 on the roasting cart. You buy inventory for $750, and that means you have $750 remaining in your cash at your checking account. So here we see the basic identity in this beginning snapshot. You can only have as much stuff as you have capital. So you raise money, but that's all the stuff you can have. And here's the basic equation at the bottom. Assets equal liabilities plus equity. So it's pretty straightforward. Let's create a hot dog stand. So at the bottom here you can see I have entries. And what we'd like to do is first make capital entries, that is entries on the right hand side. So if we look down at the bottom, we can see we have, for example, a note payable of $4,000. Well, this is money that we borrowed from a bank, and we owe it back to the bank, so that's a liability. And we have equity here of $5,000. So as owners, we put in $5,000. So this gives us total funds of $9,000, or total capital of $9,000. So we can use this to acquire stuff, as we've just explained. So at the bottom here, that's what's remaining, is the stuff or our assets. So let's say we spend $500 on our hot dog inventory out of our $9,000. Of course, that leaves $8,500. We buy our little wagon, our roasting cart, and keeping the hot dogs warm, etc., for $7,500. And that leaves us with $1,000 remaining in cash. So we have total assets of $9,000. Again, what you owe in funds to people limits the amount of stuff you can have. So here we see the total assets equal liabilities plus equity. All right, just as a recap then, the funds that you put into the firm as an owner are called equity. The funds that you borrowed, whether it's from a bank or others, it's called debt. So you have debt and equity, and this combines to form your capital. That is the amount of money you have to get started. You use this to buy the stuff to operate. In the case of the roasting cart, it would be for peanuts, it would be cash, peanuts, and the roasting cart. So equity is the owner's contribution, and you can sell stock to shareholders. And of course, you're the last people to get paid. The owners are the last people to get paid. The debt, you can borrow from the bank or a note payable, or you can sell IOUs, which are called bonds. But if you, for some reason, had to sell off all your assets to pay back people, the debt holders would get their funds first, and the owners would get their funds last if there was any left. So what we say is that equity holders are the last in line, and debt holders are the first in line. Now, banks are financial intermediaries, and they function like most other firms. They have liabilities and assets. So one of the things that's unusual is that we put money in a bank. You and I deposit funds in a checking account or savings account, and that is a liability to the bank. In other words, they are essentially borrowing money from their depositors. So the deposits are a liability. There are typically two kinds of deposits in overall sense. One would be your checking accounts where you could write a check, or you can demand the deposits immediately. So we would call those demand deposits. Or you can put them in longer term accounts, some of which have contracts where you cannot withdraw the money immediately, but these we're going to call time deposits. So a savings account or a CD is a time deposit. So two major types of deposits: demand deposits and time deposits. Right. In addition, a bank, just like anyone else, can borrow funds. In this case, they're borrowing money from another bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, and here I have it listed as the Fed loan. And obviously need equity to start the bank, so owners raise capital and contribute this to the institution starting the company. And now we have total liabilities plus equity of $100,000. Well, you can't just leave this in account because you have to pay wages, you have to pay interest on your deposits. So you put the money to work. So how does a bank put the money to work? Well, they create assets. Well, they have their buildings, etc., but most of their assets are in financial forms. So you have $100,000, you have to set some of it aside. People come in and they withdraw money, so you have to have that. And you can leave those kinds of funds in your vault as cash, as $5,000, or in this case I have a Fed account or a checking account at the Fed for $5,000. And that's the only two places where you can keep your reserves. Loans, for example, for cars, homes, etc., of $65,000. So what's the bank own? The bank owns the underlying home, for example. So if they have a home mortgage and they keep it on their books, they own the home. So the loan is an asset backed by the house itself. And banks also make investments. Here, $25,000, but a lot of these investments are in bonds. That is, companies or the government borrowing money. So here, government securities are U.S. Treasury securities, and we'll talk about those in a moment. You have raised $100,000 in capital. You've loaned $65,000 out, invested $25,000, and had $10,000 in reserves. So you have total assets of $100,000. So here, the simple bank looks just like any other company. It's raised money or capital, and it's deployed the capital to acquire assets from which they hopefully will earn an income. So let's try this on your own. I've got them, the entries listed here, pretty much in order. But on the right-hand side, we have liabilities. On the left-hand side, we have assets, so we know what those are. Liabilities are the funds you raise. So we have here equity that owners contribute. Depositors put in $60,000 in their savings accounts or time deposits. They put in $90,000 in their demand deposits. That's their checking accounts. And the bank borrowed $10,000 from the Federal Reserve Bank. That's its bank. So when we add up all of the funds that the bank has, we have $180,000, or total capital of $180,000. So $20,000 is equity, and the remaining $160,000 is debt. They use this to acquire assets. Here they set aside $20,000 because they have to do business every day and they need cash. They lend $65,000 in mortgages. They lend $70,000 to companies that need funds to operate or buy equipment, what we'd call commercial and industrial loans, but commercial loans here. And they've invested $25,000 in government debt. That is, the government is borrowing money, so they sell an IOU, and people buy these things because they feel that there's low credit risk. So now we have total assets of $180,000. So here's the basic structure of the balance sheet of a bank. It has liabilities plus equity, that is, it's raising its capital, and it's deploying that primarily in loans and investments. And we need to look through this lens to understand the operation of the financial markets in the circular flow model. Well, while you study that and go back and look at the other material that's available, be thinking ahead, because we want to look at how the banking system creates money. And it's little known to most people that the banking system does create money, so we're going to take a look at that process.